So what I thought I'd do is just talk about the points of difference that the village has, what you need to do next, talk a bit about how Southbank addressed it, quite differently, but it had a lot of different powers, and then talk about some pretty important things to do at the end of today. Firstly, there's no question about the history and longevity of a community ready to take action at the right time. I didn't realise until this morning that 1860, I got a bit of a history lesson from the City Council. It was really good. But you could just sense this morning it was just full of community people who were here for the right reasons, and they participated really well. It's a village sitting on the edge of a large city with a significant new residential areas being developed, Yarrabilba. And I think Yarrabilba is just absolutely not a threat. It's an opportunity to reinvent the village or reinvest in the village. What do you need? And I guess this one's a hard one, but it's what you're trying to do is come to a conclusion as to how you want the village to look, what's going to support it, what it will support, how it will work. I've found that the most important part of doing a development like this is having a vision. And you actually write the vision down in words, and then from there you say that's where we want to be. That's what we are, and so what have we got to, and where do we want to be in, say, 20 years' time? Pretty hard to think about 20 years, but I wouldn't think so for here because you've been here since 1860. But it is important that, having said, you might say that that the village is a vibrant place, has a sense of ownership, history, community caring, and it's made up of young people, old people, and families. And they don't all live around here. Some of them will be the young people appear to be in Yarrabilba, the families, probably more families in Yarrabilba, the older, more mature families around here. So that you want to say that this should be an exciting place to visit. Say you're talking to your grandchildren and you're looking back on what happened today and you said, I was part of that. And we worked out that this is how we want it to look and this is what it should have and these are the things it should do. And we wrote them down, we prioritised them, and that's how we did it. It'll be a great sense of satisfaction. Some of the things that are... things which are really critical when you're doing it. You might say the village green has been transferred with the completion of a landscape master plan for the site. The recreation areas for young, old and families were all included as an outcome that we needed. If before you did that, I think there's some opportunities for you to go and have a look. Firstly, you'll need to have a group of people to do this. You don't decide in a big room with a lot of people what the critical issues are because they're all up there on the wall. You've talked about them. You'll vote about it a bit later on. It'll need to go back to council. There's a hell of a process, I can assure you. But I'm trying to think of what might be similar. I don't know. If you drive down New South Wales, the highway from Brisbane to Sydney, between Port Macquarie and on your way down to Newcastle, about an hour down the track, you reach a place called Nabiac. Nabiac is it's been sort of bypassed by the expressway, but there's a ramp off it. You can go into Nabiac and there's a ramp back on. And they looked like this village looks now. Tired, needed help. They didn't have the right sort of offerings for travellers. It was all not quite there. Since then, they've worked really hard, and it's all painted up. They've got nice cafe where you can get good coffee just like we had this morning, only it's not free down there. And they've got a service station, they've got a couple of shops, hardware shops, and the village itself is, I'm not quite sure it's quite as big as here, but you can see that it's all working together. They're all talking to each other, and that's what you need to have here. There are a couple of others, but I think Nabiak's probably the better one to go to. Talking about, I'd like to come on to South Bank Corporation, and it's different because it was a project by the government of Queensland. I went there in 1997. They just appointed a new board and there was new management coming in. The board had, lucky they had a very, very strong board and a very strong-headed chairman, we're still mates, actually. They had the support of both sides of politics. It was the Liberal National Party that was in when this happened. They direct report to the Premier and a remit to fix South Bank and whatever funds it took to do it. South Bank, then the swimming pool was working, the parkland was working, but 26 of the 31 retail outlets either hadn't paid rent for a couple of years or were absolutely struggling. The choice wasn't there. The master plan was one that would have worked in Asia 20 years before. It wasn't fit for Brisbane or Australia. The good thing was that when you did your surveys, the people of Brisbane and anyone who participated in the survey, and they would just do a couple a year, when you said in the survey, what sort of a job are we doing, and we thought we might do this and we might do that, they always came back and they said, this project and this area doesn't belong to South Bank Corporation. It doesn't belong to the Queensland government, it belongs to the people of Queensland. That's where we had Expo, and it's ours, don't bugger it up. And that just continually came through, and I've sort of got the sense this morning that there'd be a fair bit of that around here. So fortunately, the board, we had support of both sides of politics. It wasn't long before the Liberal National Party lost the election. Peter Beattie came in. It was they'd all agreed that it was one that neither side of politics would object to. Peter was a great Premier to deal with. Direct report, you could get access to him whenever we wanted. And he then approved the second round of funds to go and do the master plan that you guys are going through the process of now, that the board had done. They'd got master architects in, planners, and done a master plan and said, this is what we want and this is what it should look like when it's finished. And they said, now go to it. The board, pushed very heavily by the chairman, had a vision to build the best street in the world. And you know, the board was saying, hey, gee, that's a pretty tough one. And he would say, no, we're going to stick to it because whatever we do, it's got to be as good as it is in the world. If we don't quite get there, that'll be okay. But at least that's what we strove for. So you'll see quite a lot of things in there that I think the water fountain where the kids play these days, I can remember one of the last things I did before I left in 2005 was to give them a report on how you fixed up spent money on a water playground. And they said, well, that's really nice, Bill, but is this as good as it can get? Have you gone and had a look at others, or you had other people, you know, is it going to be the best in the world? And I said, no, but it's $1.5 million and that's a lot. And anyway, I said, it's up to you. They ultimately spent about $3 million on it. And it is outstanding, but they had to cut other things out, so they prioritised. Ultimately, South Bank actually paid back all the debt by building the apartments, the office blocks, Southbank Corporation still owns the retail on the ground floor. And they had their own planning powers, one licence that you could, liquor licence, you could put liquor anywhere provided they met with the conditions of it, and the funding was good. So I'm not sure, that's not right for here, but you need a group of people who will be your guidance and your reference group to take through the outcomes of today, establish some priorities before you go back to the public and say this is the outcome of today and yesterday and months ago and maybe tomorrow, and this is how we interpret it, and this is what we think we'd like to see there. And that group will have thought about how much it all costs. You don't have to get it down back of the envelope type stuff. What you can afford and what you can't afford, and the priority in what you should do first. I just stop there and say the first thing I think you should do is, once you've got to that stage, is have a plan for the doing up the road front out here from the roundabout through to the hotel, and get some billboards up, and on those billboards at each end put a diagram of what you see it will look like in 5 years' time, or what it might look like in 10 years' time, because it's very few people. I can't read something in my head and quite often understand what they think it's going to look like. And so we've found at Southbank that you draw a picture, you do, and you say people that's what it'll look like. It's interesting with Southbank that it's just about finished now. There's one building left to go, which is almost complete at the end of Grey Street. And it's almost identical to what we said it would be, probably a little bit bigger, I think. When you're dealing with the rejuvenation of the retail, you've got to demonstrate that you've got a view, that there are other things going to happen around. You have to start to pick and choose. You're not landlords, where Southbank was a landlord in most cases. The things that you want. In a place like Southbank, there were lots of people living there then. You wanted a chemist, you wanted a coffee shop, paper shop, you wanted a small IGA. They were the most important things. And it's interesting, the IMAX theatre was built in Southbank, and it was a failure. It cost the earth to go to, and there wasn't a great variety of movies, but they built a wonderful building with 5 theatres in there, one that would seat about 500 people and 4 others. They went belly up, and Southbank Corporation bought the building back off them, and then looked around the market and said, what do we replace it with? Economically, or if you wanted cash straight up front, the biggest hit you'd get was be for apartments or office building. But we looked long and hard, and we took the picture theatre, which was the people, I don't know, over in Balmoral, the low-cost producer, where I think if you're my age, you can get in there for about $7 still. It's the cheapest one in Brisbane, and a good theatre. It produced, the people through that theatre are 1.2 million people a year. Now that's 13,000 people a day. Sorry, 3,000 people a day go through it. It's just phenomenal. That then spins off, and people want to have a feed afterwards, they want to have an ice cream, they want to have a walk through the park, etc., etc. So it then underpinned all the restaurants, and it's gone gangbusters ever since. Quality of design is everything. Don't say we're out here and we shouldn't have the best design that we can. That will attract people. I was looking at the park bench over in the green at lunchtime, and there were the 4 benches around the outside of a gravelled area with a tree in the middle. The benches were all in the sun. The tree wasn't very big and didn't have many leaves, and it just didn't look inviting to be in. So there is some wonderful design out there, and I'd suggest that you do that. Establish a business association. That was one of the things that was really good about South Bank, is we got all the traders in South Bank and surrounding to join a business association, not to be a tenants association, but to speak as one voice when they spoke to governments or to the council. And the council or the state government will always talk to you if you represent a community and you've done all the hard work of getting one voice. It's hard for them to knock you back. So I'd suggest you give that a bit of thought. The project, having run a couple of councils and worked in others, you need a dedicated project manager from basically this day onwards to implement the vision. And that project manager shouldn't be someone that's got 4 or 5 other jobs. It might only be a part-time job, or it might be a 3-month or a 6-month job. But to get the vision, make sure that there is the vision, that you've gone down and with a small group, you've set up a group and prioritised the project and agreed the funding, and prepared a master plan with time, schedules and costs, and then you begin the renewal. I'd suggest that when you're doing up the front, which should happen at about the same time, that you've talked to everybody. You've got wide footpaths. There'll still be cars there. But it's an interesting place where you can walk down the street, and I think from the roundabout through to the hotel it would be wonderful if you could do the footpath on both sides of the street between those 2 buildings. At the airport, Brisbane Airport Corporation, if you go out there to the domestic terminal, you'll see as you drive in now on your right-hand side near the international terminal, it's just been, all the trees are gone, there's mulch, there's everything. And some people think that's where the new runway is going, but it's not. It's going out near the bay. But it's got, the billboards are up now, and it's about a car yard where you have a test track. It's on 25 or 45 hectares of land, I'm not quite sure. I think it's 45 in total when it's finished. Where you've got a test track down one end, and up the other end you've got all the major retailers who sell ordinary cars, sell 4-wheel drives, sell fancy cars, and you can go in there, park your car. You can have your car serviced if that's the one you've got, but you can also pick out a car and drive it. So you can test it. You can test the 4-wheel drive on mud and sand and all sorts of stuff. And the fancy car, you can go and hop on the skid pan and see how you go, hopefully. So it's that sort of stuff. Now, thank goodness they put the billboards up, because nobody, and people still shaking their heads saying, is this really work? It's a $400 million plus project, and it's started now, and we think the airport thinks it's going to be a boomer. So I need some time for questions. I think I'll probably stop there. But just pictures, plans and timelines you should have on the billboards out the front. Very important, so that you're saying to people as they come past, and you've got quite a decent ant trail of cars coming and going who are not stopping here. They're going through, and it'll grow. and you're warming them up to the fact that you're doing something, and you're creating an interest and curiosity, and then you've got to fulfil on the plan.
We've got one question down the back.
Thanks. Okay, where doing up the main street is concerned, I know you've talked about widening putting footpaths in, etc. But the actual shop frontages, at the moment it's a bit hodgepodge. Like we've got 3 different complexes over there, all sort of looking a bit different. We've got 2 of them that kind of don't really front the road, they're kind of they're back a bit. How would you address that? Would you look at making it look a bit more systematic, a bit more visual?
I guess I included that in the footpath and the doing up the front. No question it's got to be done. And I think you go to the owner of where the pie shop is, and that needs a lot of help. If you look at the places on the other corner, they all need freshening up. If you can go to them with your plan, your vision for where the village is going to go to, and say, this is what we're going to do. It's been signed off by the people, it's been signed off by the council, and the first bit will be funded. It's hard, and work on them, and sometimes lean on them and say, do you want to be the sort of the missing tooth in the big smile, or it's that sort of stuff. It's really say that it's going to benefit them in the retail value of their business. And other than that, the council might put a levy on, and say, this is a special levy on this area because we can't get agreement, and this is what we're going to do with it. It wouldn't be a particularly big one, but yeah. Stick to your guns.
We've just got one last quick question. Okay, this has been really a learning curve for me today, and it's been wonderful for me. I've learnt so much, and I can't wait to go home and tell my husband about it all. But you've mentioned about having a project manager or a project coordinator. Yeah, and then you talked about, or you mentioned a team. How do we do that? Or is it all through council? This is, like I said, a learning curve for me. So I'm sure others are thinking, how do we get going with this?
Well, the council's is very important in this, but they shouldn't be dominant in that group, but they need to be there. You people should select a group from people who have been here today. I think people who might come from the industrial estate, if you think someone's missing that would be good, don't have a big group, maybe 10 or 12, and a couple from the council who keep you honest and say, look, that's great that you think that's what you're going to do, but when you get to council, you don't have donkey's chance of getting it approved. We used to have Glenn Davis on the board of South Bank Corporation, and he was the Director General of the Premier's Department. He's now the Vice Chancellor of Melbourne University. And he was one of the best board members I've ever struck. He would sit in South Bank and he'd say, yeah, I fully understand what you're doing. I think you've got me 100%. This is all hands up sort of thing. But he'd say, but just remember that when I'm on the other side of the river with my hat on as Director General of the Premier's Department, he said, these are the issues I'm going to think about, and maybe you should cover those off or modify what you want. So it's that sort of guidance from the council, someone who's passionate about it, people who, and will tell you when you think they've got no chance at all. It's not worth doing. The Chamber of Commerce is one group. Some retailers who are not part of the Chamber of Commerce but would have some skills in this area would be helpful. Yeah, you work it out.
Or organising like business people to get together and community to get together and have a talk about it.
Yeah, I think the council will take you down that route and promise not to be the dominant party, which you haven't been today, which is fantastic. It was great to have your mayor talking to us this morning and yourself.